Everyone congratulated me. That's how I know this story is going to sound strange, maybe even ungrateful, but it's the truth. When I made the decision that defined my life, people smiled, nodded, and told me I was doing the right thing. And they were right. That's what makes it unbearable. There was no chaos surrounding that moment. No raised voices. No pressure. Just options laid out clearly, rationally, like items on a checklist. One path was stable, respectable, predictable. The other was uncertain, emotionally charged, and difficult to justify without sounding irresponsible. I didn't hesitate long. I chose the life that made sense. I chose security over curiosity. Approval over instinct. The version of myself that looked good on paper over the one that kept me awake at night. People said I was smart, mature, sensible. No one warned me that right and alive are not the same thing. At first, everything worked exactly as promised. The structure held. The routines fit. The future unfolded in manageable pieces. I told myself that discomfort was just the price of adulthood, that passion fades for everyone, that longing is something you outgrow. That belief carried me for years. I built a life that functioned smoothly without asking much of me. I met expectations. I fulfilled roles. I became someone others could rely on, and that reliability became my identity. Inside, something else was happening. Not pain. Not sadness. A slow dulling. I noticed it in moments of silence. In the way achievements felt neutral the instant they were reached. In how conversations about dreams made me feel like an observer rather than a participant. I told myself it was normal. That depth comes later. That fulfillment follows consistency. Later became a convenient word. I avoided thinking about the other path. The one I hadn't chosen. I treated it like a hypothetical, an idea that belonged to a younger version of me who didn't understand consequences yet. But that version never really disappeared. It waited. Sometimes it surfaced unexpectedly in music I couldn't explain my reaction to, in places that made my chest tighten for no logical reason, in conversations where I almost said something honest and stopped myself at the last second. The truth I didn't want to admit was simple and terrifying. I hadn't chosen the life I wanted. I had chosen the life I could defend. And defense slowly replaced desire. The first time I realized something was wrong wasn't during a crisis. It was during a moment that should have felt complete. I was exactly where I had planned to be years earlier. Everything was aligned with the version of the future I had committed to. And yet, standing there, I felt like a visitor. That feeling scared me more than failure ever could. Because failure implies risk. This felt like success without meaning. I tried to fix it quietly. More discipline. More gratitude. More acceptance. I told myself that wanting something else after choosing correctly was a form of immaturity. But the emptiness didn't argue. It waited. And over time, it became impossible to ignore the question forming underneath everything: what if the right choice was the wrong one for me? That question didn't demand an answer immediately. It settled into my life like a crack in the foundation, small enough to overlook, large enough to grow. And once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. Once that question appeared, everything started to tilt. Not visibly. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But inside me, the balance shifted. The life I had chosen began to feel like a performance I could execute perfectly without ever fully inhabiting it. I became very good at doing what was expected. So good that people stopped asking if I wanted anything different. That's another quiet danger of making the right choice: it trains the world to see you as settled, complete, finished. When you express doubt later, it sounds like ingratitude instead of honesty. I learned to keep those doubts to myself. They showed up most clearly in moments that required imagination. When someone asked where I saw myself in the future, I answered with facts instead of feelings. Positions instead of desires. Stability instead of direction. My future was solid. And strangely empty. I noticed how often I envied people who were struggling. Not because I wanted their problems, but because they still seemed connected to something raw and personal. They were failing at things they cared about. I was succeeding at something I felt detached from. That realization filled me with shame. I had everything I was supposed to want. Wanting more or different felt like betrayal. So I swallowed it. I told myself that longing was a leftover habit from a less responsible version of myself. But longing doesn't disappear when you dismiss it. It just turns inward. I began to feel trapped by my own competence. Every time I considered changing direction, the same thoughts appeared: you've invested too much. People depend on you. It's too late to start over. Those thoughts sounded reasonable. Adult. Sensible. They also sounded final. The moral dilemma revealed itself slowly. Staying meant living a life that no longer felt like mine. Leaving meant dismantling something I had built carefully, responsibly, and at great personal cost. There was no villain in this story. No obvious mistake. Just a version of me who had optimized for safety and discovered, too late, that safety can become a cage. I began to feel a low-grade panic I couldn't explain. Not anxiety attacks, a constant pressure. As if my life were moving forward without consulting me. Days passed efficiently. Weeks disappeared. Milestones arrived and left without leaving marks. Time accelerated. That terrified me. I realized I had mistaken permanence for security. The very things I had chosen to protect myself, predictability, structure, approval, were now preventing me from responding honestly to who I had become. One night, I allowed myself to imagine the unchosen life without romanticizing it. I didn't picture success or happiness. I pictured uncertainty. Risk. Disappointment. I pictured being misunderstood. And to my surprise, that version of the future felt lighter. Not easier. Just more alive. That was when the truth became unavoidable. I wasn't afraid of failing. I was afraid of invalidating the choice I had already made. Because admitting it was wrong would mean accepting responsibility for years lived half-present. It would mean grieving time I could never get back. It would mean facing the possibility that being right had cost me something irreplaceable. That realization didn't push me into action. It froze me. I stood between two forms of loss: the life I was living, and the life I could no longer fully reclaim. And for the first time, I understood that there was no clean solution. No version of the future where everything balanced out. All that remained was the question I had avoided for years: would I rather live with regret for choosing wrong? Or regret for never choosing at all? That question didn't let me sleep. And eventually, it demanded an answer. I didn't make a dramatic exit. That's the part people expect when they hear about someone abandoning the life they worked so hard to build. They imagine a bold declaration, a sudden break, a visible transformation. None of that happened. What I did instead was smaller and more terrifying. I admitted the truth to myself. Not all at once. Not heroically. But honestly enough that I could no longer hide behind the idea that I was simply being responsible. I accepted that the life I had chosen, the right life, was not the true one. That it fit me logically, but not emotionally. That it had given me stability at the cost of presence. That admission alone felt like betrayal. Because once you name a mistake, you inherit it. I didn't dismantle my life overnight. I didn't erase commitments or walk away from people who relied on me. I stopped doing something subtler and far more difficult. I stopped pretending that endurance was the same as fulfillment. I began making choices that didn't optimize for appearance. Choices that couldn't be easily explained or justified. I allowed myself to disappoint people gently, honestly, without apology. Some relationships strained. Some assumptions broke. Some futures quietly expired. That hurt. But something else happened too. The constant pressure I had lived with for years, the quiet, invisible weight of self-denial began to lift. Not because I had fixed everything, but because I was no longer lying about it. The regret didn't disappear. It matured. It became less about what I had chosen and more about what I was choosing now. Less accusatory. More instructive. I learned that second chances don't look like fresh starts. They look like adjustments made too late to be clean, but early enough to matter. The life I live now isn't the one I once imagined for myself, neither the safe one nor the reckless alternative. It's something in between. Imperfect. Constrained. Real. I still grieve the years I spent confusing correctness with meaning. I still wonder who I might have been if I had trusted my instincts earlier. But I no longer confuse regret with failure. Regret is a signal not to undo the past, but to stop repeating it. If you're listening to this and standing at a crossroads, choosing the path that looks safest because it's easier to explain, hear this clearly: a life that makes sense can still be wrong for you. And choosing right doesn't protect you from loss, it just changes its shape. I chose the right life. And I paid for it quietly, over years, with pieces of myself I didn't realize were irreplaceable. I can't get those pieces back. But I can refuse to lose any more. And that choice, imperfect, late, and honest, is the first one that truly feels like mine.